Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Sulha, where Israelis and Palestinians come together with the goal of reaching common ground. A very special guest we have tonight. I'm very excited to have him on. Before we get started, a quick shout out to our Patreon Visionary members. We have Trivium Energy, PTY Ltd, SOG Cannabis, Max Marine, Geffen Posner, Adam Becker, Maya, Kimberly, and our champion and legendary members, Rajia and Speedy Weedy. If you want to become patron or support the show, you can find information in the description. All and any support is greatly appreciated. Today's guest needs no introduction. And if you by chance don't know who our guest is, I left a Wikipedia link in the description, but he really needs no introduction. It's a great pleasure to have Norman Finkelstein on the show. Norman, it's great to have you.
Well, thank you for having me.
So before we get started, I just want to note something very important. When I shared on social media that we're going to be having Norman Finkelstein on the show, I was a bit shocked with the responses I received. Many said we shouldn't platform Norm. Others even called for my cancellation. It seems those people don't know who we are and what we're all about. There's not going to be any gotcha moments tonight. I'm not going to question Norm on every offensive thing he's ever said. We're going to hear from Norm with an open mind, and we're going to have a vibrant and respectful conversation about our differences. These differences certainly exist, and it's going to be interesting to talk through them. This, after all, is what we're all about. So, Norman, before we really get into it, I'm very much interested, you being a son of two Holocaust survivors, how your upbringing impacted your activism and your moral outlook.
I've answered that question on many occasions. At some point, I become repetitive, and also when you become repetitive, it begins to sound rote and devoid of any moral depth. So I'm not quite sure how I would want to answer it for you, except to say that I grew up in a home where the Nazi Holocaust was, even as it was unspoken, it was omnipresent. If you walked into my living room, we lived originally in a very poor neighborhood in Brooklyn, and after my parents came over, you have to remember, after World War II, you couldn't just come to the United States if you were Jewish. You had to have a sponsor who was going to basically pay the bills, which to some extent you could see was understandable because we had just gone through a war and people were not about to foot the bills for others when they had just made a huge sacrifice to win the war. Not the kind of sacrifice the Russians had made, but it was a sacrifice. Americans were killed. We were in a wartime economy and so forth. So you had to have a sponsor, and we had everyone in my parents' family on both sides was exterminated during the war. However, a couple of relatively distant relatives did survive in the United States, and one of them agreed to be the sponsor. They were very rich, the Greenbergs. They owned most of the real estate in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. They were spectacularly rich, and they sponsored us, my parents, who we lived in Bushwick Avenue in Brooklyn, which was very poor then. And then we moved to Borough Park. Now Borough Park is an Orthodox Jewish enclave. It wasn't back then. It was a mixture of Jewish and Italian working class. It was mostly secular. And if you walk into our apartment, it's very small, simple. On the wall, just as there is right now on my wall, because I kept the pictures. Maybe I could just tilt the camera and you'll tell me if you can see it. Let's see.
Yeah, I could see it.
The piano in the distance. Let me move the lamp. You'll see in the distance the pictures on the wall, and those were the pictures of the wall in my family apartment in Borough Park, and it was the only surviving pictures on both sides of my family of any member. My mother had an aunt who lived in the US. Pictures were sent during the war, and those pictures hung on the wall in the living room. And they were strange sorts of pictures because they were pictures of my mother's father, my mother's mother, and my mother's two sisters and her brother. But we never referred to them as aunts, uncles, and grandparents. It was my mother's mother, my mother's father, my mother's two sisters, and my mother's brother. Uh, so they were kind of a mystical, a ghostly presence in our home. And that was the whole atmosphere. It was really shrouded. I don't want to say this in any way to diminish or disparage my parents, but the home was shrouded in death. And along with that was uh, my parents' moral, the lessons that they drew. Excuse me. Hold on for one moment.
No problem. How's everyone in chat doing today? Maybe let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We got a nice viewership going on.
And it was the lessons my parents drew from that experience. Now, I would say that the lessons had both a political component and a individual moral component. And the political one, my parents came out of the war 100%, I take that back, 150% pro-Soviet, pro-Russian. You could not say a single word in my family home against Stalin. It was not possible. Long after the Communist Party had denounced Stalin, long after the most militant, the most militant defenders of the Soviet Union had distanced themselves from Stalin. In my home, you couldn't say a word against him. The Soviet Union defeated fascism. The Red Army defeated the Nazis, and that's all they cared about. Everything else was trivial, a footnote beside the point by comparison. So there was that. And anyone who denounced the Soviet Union, as far as my parents, both of them, were concerned, they were traitors, which is an interesting second story because they could never speak about their Nazi Holocaust experience because at the time when the Nazi Holocaust was being capitalized upon in the United States, it went along with the campaign to denounce Russia, the whole Soviet Jewry campaign, and my parents would not be part of any public event which entailed denunciation of the Soviet Union. So even though they were among the rare survivors of the Nazi Holocaust, all this talk about survivor is complete nonsense. There were, after, at the end of World War II, there were about 100,000 survivors in the Nazi ghettos, labor camps, and concentration camps. There were about 100,000. By the 1970s, you would guess about half had died. So you're talking about a quite small number of survivors. My parents were among them. About that, there was never any dispute. My mother was in Majdanek concentration camp, and 2 slave labor camps. My father, according to my mother, because I never spoke to him about it, she told me that he had been in 8 concentration camps. He ended up in Auschwitz. He was on the Auschwitz Death March. So they had both experienced everything. And they were also from 1940 to 43. They were both in the Warsaw Ghetto. They were among the last survivors of the ghetto. The survivors of the ghetto, the numbers are put between 20 and 30,000. The survivors were uh, uh, transported to Majdanek concentration camp. So they never were able to speak about their experiences because of their refusal to in any way say any word that was in any way critical of the Soviet Union. That was the political side. The personal side was they did impart. I don't want to say they completely practiced, but they certainly imparted to all of us, myself and my 2 brothers, uh, a sympathy for the underdog and a revulsion at war in general and the criminal abuse of human rights. That sounds very canned. This is not working hard. I don't know why. It just started. I'm wondering, I'm not sure what's causing the cough. What do you do for a cough? Give me a suggestion.
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't get a cough too often. Maybe no problem. Maybe chat could help.
Let me try the gargle. Hold it.
Chat, how do you deal with a cough? What's the best way? I admittedly have not been sick in like 5 years, so not familiar with these remedies. Cough drops, drink water, ginger root, cough syrup, codeine. Yeah, codeine works. I remember that from back in the day. Honey or pineapple juice. Norm, if you can hear this, we're getting a lot of great suggestions.
It came out of nowhere, the cough.
I hope you're not coming down with something.
I'm okay. So, as I said, there was the political dimension and there was the personal dimension. And the personal dimension was there was a sensitivity in our homes to the sufferings of others. In the time when I lived, African Americans here and Vietnamese during the war in Vietnam. So, to make a long story short, the apple didn't fall far from the tree.
Thank you for sharing that. It's fascinating hearing how the children of survivors were impacted. My mother being one of them, and it seems like it, in many ways, turned some people into pacifists, and others it perhaps made more militant. It instilled in them the fear and the need for strong defense. I know it's very much part of the Jewish narrative, of the Jewish and Israeli narrative, how much the Holocaust impacted them. But it seems most Israelis have a quite different outlook than yourself.
It basically came down to which lesson you drew from the Nazi Holocaust. Never again was one lesson, and never again to Jews was the other lesson. And there was no accounting for why one would derive the first lesson or one would derive the second lesson. I remember my mother commenting to me, my parents' marriage was a flaming disaster. However, I remember my mother commenting after their divorce. She said, We never quarreled about politics. I mean, our family was intensely political, but they never disagreed with, and their politics were very eccentric. They were weird. Okay, I don't want to say weird. Their defense of Stalin was well beyond the call of duty. Uh, I would say beyond even what his wife, Stalin's wife, would say, or daughter. But that doesn't say very much because Stalin's wife committed suicide, and his daughter basically
Mm.
built a career on repudiating him. But I still respected my parents a lot because they were not for sale. They were not. They liked money for sure, and they could have made their little bundle from being authentic Holocaust survivors. But if the price was to renounce any of their beliefs, they wouldn't do it. They were uh, absolutely, when it came to their life experience, they were absolutely not for sale. Either I say what I believe or I don't say it. So,
Right.
when I say they would call, I'll give you an example. One of the directors of Yad Vashem was this guy named Gutman, Israel Gutman, who was quite well known. And Gutman was with my father in Auschwitz, and he was in the Auschwitz death march with my father. They were both Zionists, Hashomer Hatzair, the socialist, the socialist Zionist organization in Austria, in the DP camps, the displaced people camps. There, there were, you would call close comrades. There were pictures I have pictures from Austria of them together. But then when Israel Gutman became a star of the Holocaust industry, he was a director of Yad Vashem. He was a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto. He claims he was in the uprising, but that apparently is not true. In any event, as I said, one of the prerequisites is you have to denounce the Soviet Union. And
Mm.
when he started to denounce the Soviet Union, their friendship ended. And my father, it was very painful for him because he had so few concrete connections with that past. And Gutman was one, but he just shook his head and he said, I
Right.
went in the car with him and he said, another traitor.
Huh. I want to talk to you about the concept of Holocaust inversion. For those watching or listening who aren't familiar, Holocaust inversion is essentially the concept of comparing Jews or Israel to the Holocaust. Um, Norm, this has very much been a tactic of yours to describe Israel, and many would even say that you, by and large, are the person who has normalized Holocaust inversion. I wonder if you find this to be an effective and accurate way to describe the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Well, I guess there are several ways to look at it. I'm not making any extenuations, any apologies. I'll just try to lay out uh, the way I see it, and people can agree or disagree. First of all, at a certain point, the Nazi Holocaust became a touchstone of evil. So the only way you can make an argument, you were able to make an argument about something being evil, was to in some way related to the Holocaust. Otherwise, it wasn't evil. The Holocaust became the the standard by which you judge evil or not. So, since everything else was being compared to the Holocaust, it didn't seem a stretch to also, in order to arouse people's indignation at what was happening, to also bring in the experience of the Palestinians. So, at the time, it seemed to be the only way in which the feelings of Jews would be rattled by what Israel was doing. Secondly, you have to remember that the Nazi Holocaust, not in general, but in particular for Jews, was the standard. And so, constantly at the time, I'm talking about when I say at the time, the 70s and the 1980s, there were articles being written about how Israel's treatment of the Palestinians in the occupied territories compared with the Nazi Holocaust. So the most extreme, the furthest that Israeli scholars would go, for example, the scholar Professor Zimmerman and several others would say that if you compare the treatment of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories, if you compare that treatment with the treatment of Jews in Nazi Germany up until 1938 or 39, it was said relatively close. Relatively close. Obviously, the cutoff being 1937, 1938, 39, roughly around Kristallnacht, uh, relatively close, the treatment of the two. So even among Jewish scholars, because the Holocaust was the looming tragedy and event in modern Jewish history, there's going to be a um, a tendency to make connections, make comparisons, draw out contrasts as well as comparisons between the two. So on that grounds as well, it didn't seem wrong to invoke in the same context the Nazi Holocaust and what was happening to the Palestinians. Number three, if you look at, for example, the article by a young Ari Shavit, not the Ari Shavit who ended up writing the book My Promised Land and was the prominent writer on Haaretz newspaper. In 1990, he wrote an article in the New York Review of Books on his experience as a guard in one of the camps in Gaza, Ketziat. No, wait, I can't remember now if Ketziat was in Gaza or right outside Gaza, but he writes an article describing his experience there. And there was a line, remember, New York Review of Books was very mainstream, very mainstream. It was the intellectual magazine. You probably don't even know what it is, but it was the most influential. It's funny, you don't know. It was the most powerful intellectual magazine in the United States, um, the New York Review of Books. And he says, well, comparing Katia with with the concentration camps, he says it's ridiculous. But he said the problem is the thought keeps nagging at you that it's not different enough. He said it's not the same, but the problem is it's not different enough. You get this creepy feeling. He says you're sitting as a guard in the camp. You're hearing every night the screams, the yells, the shrieks from the prisoners as they're being tortured. And he says, the problem the problem that I have is not that they are concentration camps. The problem I have is they aren't enough unlike concentration camps. So there too, the comparison came in. The point being, there was a whole intellectual and moral ambiance in which the Nazi Holocaust and how it compared and didn't compare to the plight of the Palestinians was out there. Now, admittedly, some people only raised it to show how completely different it was, but others raised it to say, well, it's not so different than Nazi Germany between 1933 and 39. Or, yes, it's different, but there is a problem. It's not different enough. So that was the context. Nowadays, and again, I'm not distancing myself from my past. I obviously, if I made errors, and I made many errors politically, more than I care to remember, and I can't even pretend in the balance sheet my errors are outweighed by my correct politics. I'm not sure. Um, so I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong about my past. Not at all.
So,
No, but
n-
the point I was making is that now that the situation of the Palestinians has established its own integrity and its own, what you might call its own moral authority. I rarely bring up the Nazi Holocaust. Actually, I don't even talk about it. Once my parents passed in 1995, I stopped talking about it. I wrote The Holocaust Industry shortly after their death. I had been involved, I don't know if you know any of these things, I had been involved in this public debate with this fellow named Daniel Jonah Goldhagen. He had written a book called Hitler's Willing Executioners, which was a huge bestseller, and I thought it was a crock of shit. It was just awful. And I engaged in a big public debate with him. Um, and then I wrote The Holocaust Industry. And then by around 2000, let's call it about 2003, I never read another book on the topic. I just stopped.
so I'd like to make the case against Holocaust inversion that it's counterproductive. I think my issue is, I would say, threefold. One, sure, you can draw parallels between any two events that are causing people to needlessly be harmed. But if you actually seriously compare them, whether it's the sheer numbers of casualties, whether it's the means in which people are being harmed, or whether it's the intention behind the harming, I think that it's just it's not an accurate comparison. But I think more importantly, put the accuracy aside, it's the kind of comparison that is so inflammatory to Jewish people and to Israelis that when they hear it, they're no longer open to listening to what you have to say. So it seems like it's a form of rhetoric that turns away people, and perhaps the people who most need to hear your message are refusing to listen. And thirdly, it almost makes the person speaking the topic of conversation. So much of the attacks against you throughout the years have been the words you said, not the policies you propose, but your inflammatory rhetoric. It's almost like doing this gives people endless fodder to attack you rather than actual listen to your message about Palestinians. So I think we very well can talk about how horrific the situation in Gaza is. We could talk about the brutality of our military presence in the West Bank, and we could do all this and give a realistic description of the situation and do it in a way that Israelis and Jews are going to hear what we have to say. And I really think this channel is testament of that. Our audience goes all the way from anti-Zionists who want to see the destruction of Israel and Kahanists who want to expel Palestinians and everything in between. And they're able to hear because the message is in a way that they're open to hearing us. So I'm under the impression that Holocaust inversion, not only is not accurate, but it's the least effective way to reach Jews and Israelis.
Well, there are a number of things to say to that. In general, I agree with you. At this point, I agree with you. Um, I would say, let me just rattle off just points of disagreement. Number one, there are aspects of the crime against the Palestinians which I would say, I don't want to say worse or better, but certainly they give pause. Let's take one example. Since 2006, the people of Gaza have been under a brutal, inhumane blockade by Israel. Gaza is about 2 million people. 70% of them are refugees. Uh, More than a half are children. They're under the age of 18 years old. Okay, we're talking about 1 million children. 1 million children have now, as we speak now, they've been confined in a concentration camp. That's the opinion, not of me, it was the opinion of Baruch Kimmerling, who was probably the most respected sociologist at the Hebrew University. And he was writing in 2002, before the most brutal stage of this siege, this blockade of Gaza was imposed. He called Gaza, and now I'm quoting him, the biggest concentration camp ever. The biggest concentration camp ever. Amira Haas, who's very careful with her words, and very sensitive to not exploiting incendiary language. She had, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, she had an article in which she just went through all the basic facts, and she says it's just kind of impossible to get around the fact that Gaza is a concentration camp. Now, why do I mention this? Nazi Holocaust was, of course, horrible, and I'm not going to, sit here and trying to pretend, protest too much. Nazi Holocaust, let's date it roughly. Let's date it from the beginning of the ghettos, 40 to 44, roughly speaking, 4 years. 4 years. The Gaza ghetto has now been going on from 2006 to 2021. That's 15 years, 1 million children. 1 million children locked in a concentration camp. That's a fact. 15 years. Number two, everybody agrees Hitler could not have done what he did were it not for the cover of a war. In broad daylight, with the whole world watching, observing the normal comings and goings of people, he couldn't have done it. As you know, probably most of it is not true, but the best alibi many German can give is they didn't know. Now, I happen not to think that's very credible. There was a huge German army on the front. They were they knew what was going on. They were communicating back home. They knew what was going on. The people, in my opinion, there's a lot of scholarly literature on it. I have not kept up, but I kept up until around 2000. I said roughly around 2003 or 4. I stopped reading it. But there was already back then a huge scholarly literature on how much the German people knew. But at least they had what you might call the moral alibi of they didn't know. Gaza's going on in peacetime. Everybody knows. Right now, as we speak, there are 1 million children confined to a concentration camp in Gaza. That's uncontroversial. I spoke a couple of years ago. Yes, no.
Well,
yes.
but Norm, if I may, I'd say the concept of a concentration camp, first of all, isn't exclusive to the Holocaust. But if you want to compare Gaza to Auschwitz, for example, again, it's by no means an accurate comparison.
I'm not comparing it. But when you say that you can't make any comparisons.
No, I think you can, but I think it's just not accurate in total.
Well, it depends on what I'm not making in total. No two events, obviously, no two historical events can possibly be in total the same because they have to have occurred in different time and space. So no two events can be exactly the same. What you said was correct, in my opinion. You look for significant comparisons. If two events have significant features in common, then the analogy is useful. And here I say there are significant features that are not in common, but they work so to speak, in favor of the Palestinians. It's 15 years. It's in broad daylight. There's no fog of war. It's right there. It's happening. So I think you can make a case that in certain respects, I'll agree with you. It's not Auschwitz. It's not the mechanized industrial style assembly line killing of people. No quarrel there. No quarrel there. But in certain respects, it's actually more morally appalling. 15 years, broad daylight, confining children. We have so many international laws and statutes and legislation protecting the rights of children. And in the midst of that, confining 1 million children, more than half of Gaza's population, in a concentration camp. I think on the scale of moral atrocities, that aspect, that particular aspect, is actually worse than what happened during World War II. Broad daylight, no war, 15 years. No, it's pretty sobering, in my opinion. As I said about 2 or 3 years ago, allow me just to finish. About 2 years ago, I was speaking at Princeton uh, with several other uh, people, somebody from Amnesty International, an old comrade of mine from Princeton. And at the end, a member of the IDF was in the audience, who I guess was a student at Princeton, I'm not quite sure. And he proudly declares himself, I'm in the IDF. This was during the Gaza Great March of Return that began in March 2018. It was overwhelmingly nonviolent undertaking by the people of Gaza to break the siege. And he proudly proclaimed, I'm on the border with Gaza. I'm a soldier on the border with Gaza. I said to you, I said to him, that's the problem with Jews nowadays, with Israelis. You have no shame about that. You have no shame that you are at the prison gate of a concentration camp confining 1 million Palestinian children. You have no shame that, according to the most authoritative human rights reports, the snipers are shooting children, medics, journalists, and disabled people who are as far as 300 meters from the perimeter, who pose no life threatening danger at all. People in wheelchairs. We saw the pictures. We saw the picture of the paraplegic in a wheelchair being shot in Gaza. We saw the video of the Israeli snipers cheering as they hit a kid 300 meters away. Those are pretty sobering images. And it seems to me, if we're really moral beings, we would be investing less of our energy in trying to prove how it's not like the Nazi Holocaust, and more of our energy in trying to say, you know what? This is becoming really uncomfortable to watch in light of the Nazi Holocaust. And that's what happened in May of this past year, a few months ago. What happened? Suddenly, as the civil eruption unfolded in Israel proper, you saw these gangs of Israeli thugs going around in Arab neighborhoods in Israel and breaking windows, smashing the store windows of Arab store owners. And there was many a young Jew, many a young Jew who had been educated from Jewish day school on about the Nazi Holocaust, who started to get this creepy, queasy feeling, hey, that kind of looks like Kristallnacht. They're shouting death to the Arabs, and they're shattering the windows of Arab store owners.
So, Norman, I don't want to interrupt you, but we're already 45 minutes in, and you said we have a hard stop in an hour. So I do want to try to cover more ground. I think, though, you in your explanation of the situation in Gaza, you described it. You described how horrific the situation is there. And you were able to do it. You did use a few Holocaust comparisons, but even if you were to remove those Holocaust comparisons, your depiction of Gaza still would have been more accurate, just as bad, and more palatable for Israelis to hear you. So it seems, by and large, if we want to reach people, it's not about having the right to compare it to the Holocaust. It's not about being able to draw parallels. Ultimately, it's not going to convince Jews because let's look at numbers. The Palestinian population has quadrupled since 48. Israelis don't have an intention to exterminate Palestinians. These two things alone, again, I'm not minimizing in any way, shape, or form how horrible Gaza is or what our military presence does to Palestinians in the West Bank, but we could describe this in a way that Jews are going to hear. It seems like that's the way we should be having these conversations. And as you mentioned, you said, let's stop trying to say why it's not like the Holocaust and actually care what happens. I agree. The way to stop people from trying to explain how Gaza is different than the Holocaust is to just stop comparing it to the Holocaust and just explain it for what it is, a horrible situation that's unsustainable. There's unsustainable, and we all have a moral obligation to do something about it.
I would amend that horrible. I don't like it when anyone describes a situation where there's a clear perpetrator, and I'm not just talking about Israel-Palestine. I don't like describing it as a tragedy. If you go back to the Greek conception of a tragedy, it's something that the protagonist had no control over. We have control over. It's not a tragedy, it's a criminality. There's a perpetrator committing a crime, consciously, willfully, deliberately committing a crime. When Israeli snipers along the border with Gaza, they shoot at unarmed paraplegics in wheelchairs, that's not shoot to kill them, or shoot to maim them at the knee to give them a life-enduring injury. That's not a tragedy. That's a criminal action. So with that, with those sort of linguistic nuances, though for me it is a significant difference, I would not say what the Nazi guards did in the concentration camps. I would not call it tragic. I would call it criminal. So I have to use the same moral standard across the board. I would also add, just on a personal note, I can't, nor do I want to, climb out of my skin. If I make the comparisons, if I made those comparisons, it's because my parents made those comparisons. During the civil rights era, when when African Americans tried to integrate schools and got beaten very viciously during the attempts at integration, and also it wasn't much different in the North. Don't kid yourself. In places like Chicago and in New York, the hatred by Jews of African Americans was as thick as it was in the South. But let's just leave that aside for a moment. Have you ever seen the movie Julia?
No.
Oh, very good film. It takes place in Nazi-occupied Austria. It stars Vanessa Redgrave and Jane Fonda. And Vanessa Redgrave is an anti-fascist, probably Communist Party, but doesn't say so in the film. She's an anti-fascist, and she loses a leg. It's a very dramatic scene in the film where she reveals that she lost her leg because she came to the aid of the Jewish students during an attack by the Nazis in her university. So why do I mention it? Because my mother attended Warsaw University. She was a very extremely brilliant woman. She was studying mathematics at Warsaw University. And once I asked her, what was it like to study mathematics at Warsaw University? She said to me, study? How could you study? We had to stand, we were confined to a corner of the lecture hall, and we had to stand up. And then at the end of each class, the fascists would come and beat us up. How should we study? So how could we study? Because she was there in 1937, where Pilsudski was the head of state in Poland, and it was pretty much a proto-fascist regime. So the point being, when my mother saw the African-American kids being beaten up, she says exactly what I went through, exactly what happened to me. That was her reflex reaction. So you're telling me she shouldn't say it because it may offend some Jews? That's what she saw. That's what she felt. That was her reflex reaction. If you were to ask me, what was as she told us, what was her most vivid memory of the Nazi Holocaust? Interestingly enough, it wasn't the concentration camps. It was the hunger. She always described the hunger, especially in the ghetto. There were dead bodies. If you know the stories of the ghetto, there were dead bodies all over, the flies, the vermin. People were dying from hunger. So when you have Biafra, and there were scenes, these are all references that don't even mean anything to you, but Biafra was a place of mass hunger. It's in Central Africa during a civil war in the Congo. So Biafra became a symbol for mass hunger of children. So when Biafra happened in American news, her recollection was the Holocaust for her. Now you're going to say, no, it's different, and you have to see this, and you have to see that, and it's different. But that was her instinctive reaction. It was the same. The war in Vietnam for her was, when we used to, during the war in Vietnam, it was on the nightly news, every night on the news, okay, for years. Every night on the news, for years. Every time, and watching the news at night was a ritual. It was a family ritual in many homes, not just ours. Whenever the scenes of the Vietnam War came up, my mother would go like this. She was not a drama queen. She was literally, viscerally, constitutionally, physically incapable of looking at scenes of war. She would go like this. She would say, tell me when it's over. Tell me when it's over. And she would always compare it to the Nazi Holocaust, what the U.S. was doing in Vietnam. By the way, the numbers aren't so far off. The U.S. killed about 3 to 4 million Vietnamese during the war. So she would say, tell me when it's over. So I inherited that. You want me to crawl out of my skin? You want me to be something I'm not? That's how my parents looked at the world, and that's how I came to look at the world. I'm not going to make any apologies for it. However, I do agree at this moment in time, because as I said, the moral authority of the struggle, of the situation of the Palestinians, it's been established. It's unnecessary to drag in the Nazi Holocaust. I agree with that. And I'm not going to quarrel where there's no need to quarrel. I guess the biggest difference with you is, you see, and I don't even know, are you Israeli?
Yeah, I'm Israeli American.
Yeah.
I spent half my life.
Okay. I don't see any purpose in talking to Israelis right now. Just as I didn't think there was any purpose to talking to whites in the American South during the early years of the civil rights movement. They were very vicious I remember one person saying that was mean country. Mean. If you were a white person who showed solidarity with the blacks, you were immediately a pariah and ostracized in the American South. Same thing in South Africa. The South African whites were dug in. There were some whites who were real comrades, mostly Communist Party members, who were loyal comrades of Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress. But in general, you didn't waste time talking to the white people. You might as well talk to a wall. You can't talk to Israelis now. There's no Israel is one of those unique places in the world today. Israel does not have a left. It does not have a center. It has a right, a further right, and an ultra right. That's the whole spectrum in Israel. The rest to the left of the right, namely what we would call a center or an authentic left, you could fit them in my apartment. And they're the first ones to admit it. If you were to ask me what's a left in Israel, I would say, his name just slipped my mind, the head of B'Tselem.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't.
Oh, gosh. Okay,
I could look it up. B'Tselem.
You don't know the head of B'Tselem? You see, that's the proof.
No, I'm familiar with B'Tselem. Look, hold on. Let me tell you his name, and then I'll share what I want to share. Chagai. Is that who you're talking about? Chagai Elad?
Wonderful guy. A Harvard-trained physicist, very impressive fellow, a lot of moral authority. I would say 99 out of every 100 Israelis would probably wish he was hanging from a lamppost. And then you have, a handful of people. You have a Gideon Levy here. You have an Amira Haas there. You have a few organizations which are doing work. You're talking about a bedroom of people. You can't talk to them. They have a very good life. A high standard of living. Even the COVID was, at least for the Jewish Israelis, it was very efficiently, the vaccine was efficiently distributed. They have a very good life. You can't talk to them. They have no interest. At this point, one has to talk to those who potentially can be won over. And I don't believe that includes for sure American Jews of your generation. American Jews 30 years and under, they don't have that brainwashing when it comes to Israel anymore. That's over. Actually, that was one of the only good things that came of Trump. That the Trump-Netanyahu romance revealed a side of Israel that kind of shocked a lot of American Jews, something they didn't want to see, and now they suddenly saw that Israel is a alt-right country. 73% of Israelis loved Trump.
So Norm, we are on the last minute. Can we extend it a little bit, or?
Let me make a suggestion. I ruined this interview, or God interviewed, God, metaphorically speaking, ruined the interview with this cough that suddenly came and then suddenly just vanished. I have no idea what happened there. And secondly, it's excruciatingly hot in my apartment. So what I would recommend is the following. I don't know anything about the social media, but you have all these things called chat sites and likes and dislikes and I don't know, all this crazy shares, all this crazy stuff.
Retweets, yeah.
Yeah, so what I would recommend is you look at the feedback. If the feedback is positive, because what your audience saw is basically who I am. If they want to hear more, then we will continue it another time. And if not, it was nice meeting you and nice connecting with your audience.
So, Norm, I can tell you already that obviously some audience members are going to be upset, but by and large, we'd love to have you back. So I will reach out to you via email and we'll set up another date.
Okay, and hopefully there won't be that devilish intervention that gave me this cough, which strangely just disappeared. I don't know what happened.
Well, I think once the passion, we started getting passionate, it cured you right up.
Okay, maybe that's the explanation. But I had no cough. That was the thing. It suddenly just came.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice talking to you, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Norman. We will speak soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Friends, I will be staying on for a little bit longer. Cool. So that hour went by very fast. We touched on one topic out of 4 that I would have liked to touch on. I would say I do want to share my thoughts on our conversation. Maybe I'll do just like another live stream just for that when I have time to reflect. We could bring some audience members on as well. But I do first let me, and again, we'll have another conversation, but I do want to respond to what I would have responded to him had the conversation been able to continue. It's true that the Israeli right is large and growing, but his generalization of Israel, I think, was incorrect and ultimately harmful. I think the reason why Israelis are moving to the right is because they're losing hope in the conflict. They're seeing people around the world, they're seeing Palestinians loud in their aspiration to conquer the entire land from the river to the sea. This has the potential to radicalize people. So to view the Israeli population as a pariah of sorts, I don't think would alleviate the issue. I think it would only make it worse. I think it would exacerbate the issue. I also think that just because you are right-wing doesn't mean you're not relevant in the peace process in any way, shape, or form. There's not many, but there are a few NGOs that are right-wing peace NGOs. So I don't think just because someone's right-wing, they're by default not relevant in the conversation. We did get stuck on Holocaust inversion for most of it. I actually, he seemed to agree ultimately. Like he did try to defend the claim by talking about areas in which he thinks it's similar, but I don't know if you noticed, he ultimately said, I agree in today's age, there's no reason to bring up the Holocaust when talking about Israel-Palestine. That kind of seems like I don't want to call it a win, but that was interesting to see. And I'm also happy that we got to hear about his past. I don't know if I want to get more into it. Should I just do another live stream sharing my reflections from this conversation? Whatever, I'll go over some of the same material again. When I listened to Norman Finkelstein, and I researched him a lot the past few weeks getting ready for this, first of all, I want to say I recognize that I'm less sensitive towards inflammatory rhetoric than the average person. Why that's the case, I'm not sure. But when I listen to people like Norman Finkelstein, when I listen to Noam Chomsky, when I listen to neo-Nazis, it doesn't raise my blood pressure. I'm able to hear them and remain calm. But listening to Norm, I actually like the person. First of all, I find him to have a funny personality. Like he's a funny guy. I think he's also somewhat of a troll in the sense that I think he's intentionally antagonistic. I think he likes getting a response out of people. I think that being intentionally antagonistic is counterproductive if you want to reach a broad audience and convince people. But if that's his decision for like having fun in life, okay. But we need to recognize what kind of a childhood he had. He came from a deeply traumatized childhood. I mean, his parents were both in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And again, you could have criticism of him. Having a difficult past does not by default legitimize everything you do and say, right? The case could be made that he enabled anti-Semitism, that he normalized Holocaust inversion. I hear all these claims, and if you want to hate him for this, I accept that. I'm just sharing why I personally how I feel about him. When I look at him, I have compassion towards him. I'm a second generation Holocaust survivor. My mom is certainly damaged. I mean, you'd meet her, you'd think she's the most amazing woman ever because she is, but she carries trauma from being raised by a woman who was in the Holocaust. So I could only imagine how that must have impacted Norm. And, you know, we did see, he said a lot of why he does Holocaust inversion, he got that from his mother. Everything in his household was about death and destruction, right? Imagine growing up in that environment, what it has to a person. So when I learned about his past, when I see how his childhood impacted who he is, I do have, I have compassion for the guy. I think that also his dedication to fighting for those who are suffering is also something we need to see as commendable. That being said, I'm also very highly critical of the approach he decided to take. Again, not because he doesn't have a right to take that approach, but because I think if we want to be effective, we need to use words that are going to convince people. Yeah, those are just my in the moment thoughts. I'm happy he's willing to come again. We touched on one topic. You know, I know a lot of what he said was difficult to hear. I wasn't able to push back on nearly enough just because of time constraints. Yeah, we'll see how the next conversation goes. I'll read some super chats. Thank you so much, everyone, for the super chats. Jordan goes, his story is heartbreaking. Thanks for the $5, Jordan. We have Rajia, thanks for the £5. Thank you, Norman, for highlighting the incredible suffering that Palestinians are having to endure. Great interview. I agree. He makes a great case for the Palestinians, and it's an important one. There's one more super chat that disappeared. Whoever left it, thank you so much. If the person who left the first super chat is still watching, please rewrite your comment. You don't need to do another super chat, but just let me know and I'll read it. I see people saying bring it back. We will bring it back as long as he agrees. Wise Shepherd's asking, it wasn't a debate. Did you talk? I probably had like 15% of the talking time. That yeah, he spoke for most of it. He went on quite long monologues. I interrupted a few times when I thought it was being dragged too long. I didn't frame this as a debate. I did frame this as an interview where I'm going to challenge him on areas of disagreement. It's a form, you could consider it a form of debate, but again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not looking for gotcha moments. I think there's substantive. What's that word? What's that? There's a word I'm forgetting. Substantive. What's the word? It's not substantial. It's a word that's based. Whatever. If someone in chat could tell me the word that I'm trying to say. There's substantial differences between us, and I knew we'd get to them, and you know the discussion would be on that. I didn't try to quote every problematic thing he said and try to get gotcha moments. It's quite clear if that's what I did, he would not be willing to come back for a second round. And he perhaps also would not have agreed that again, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but he acknowledged that Holocaust inversion in today's age is wrong, which I thought that was pretty interesting to hear from him. Okay, we're getting it. Hold on. Substantive. How do you pronounce that? You know, you all see me talk a lot, but what you don't know about me is my vocab is probably below average. I think I explain things fairly well, but I don't have a great set of words to use. With time, with these live streams, I think I'm getting better. But yeah, substantive. That's how do you pronounce that? Substantive. Yeah, substantive. Right. Okay. I did on Google. You could hear how words change. So there's substantive differences between us. Let's see what else we got. I saw another super chat. Agnostic, thank you. Good job, Adar. I think Norman has good intentions, but he got too up with defending his rhetoric rather than being practical. Yeah, I agree. He got stuck on why the comparison is okay, not why it's effective. And ultimately, again, I care more about effectiveness of inactivism. But he ultimately did concede that point, I think. Ari Gareen goes, low vocab is typically a result of being from New Jersey. Yep, perhaps. Do you, as a former soldier, agree with his framing of Gaza as a concentration camp? So in order to respond to the concentration camp charge, it's important to understand that concentration camp has a meaning beyond like Auschwitz. Let me just read you what the definition is. So there's a concept of Nazi concentration camp, right? That's its own Wikipedia thing. But then you have, oh no, even if you look it up, you type in concentration camps, it talks explicitly about the Holocaust. Oh, here we go. There's an article. Concentration camps existed long before Auschwitz. They existed in France, Russia, Turkey. So it's really a concept that describes, I don't know, I'm assuming keeping a bunch of people in some kind of proximity. Now, I don't know what the exact definition of concentration camp is. It's possible that there's some version of concentration camp that Gaza could be compared to. Is the comparison to Gaza to Auschwitz in any way, shape, or form accurate? No, I mean, that's just clear. And if we want people to take like our word seriously, we need to make comparisons that make sense. So again, I think Holocaust inversion just is one of the worst possible ways to effectively communicate with people. Nir, oh, was it your super chat? No, I didn't. Can you please post again? I'll read what you said. Let's see. So Peter M goes, speaking of effectiveness, I don't think you and he has the same aims. So one thing that surprised me, and again, we didn't even get to this, we touched on one topic. One of the things that surprised me about researching Norm is that his policy proposals are actually all sensible and pragmatic. Like that's where he's coming from. So he supports two-state solutions. He said he doesn't think you could just have unlimited right of return to Israel proper, that it makes no sense. Like these are not radical positions. So I actually think his aim is finding a just solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. I just think his way of describing it is extremely inflammatory. But if you actually look at the policies he's proposing, it's all pretty mainstream stuff. We got 2 more super chats. Thank you. His stance is not that of someone who really wants to improve the situation for Gazans or Palestinians as a whole. He'll achieve the exact opposite. George, thanks for the €5. Again, I don't want to say much about his intention. For my research of him, and given his upbringing, I saw this documentary about him, and he said that his mother would respond to violence when it was on TV, like Vietnam. It wasn't just she would speak against it, she would have horror. Like she would have an extremely strong reaction to any form of violence. So I think he really, when he sees violence being committed towards Palestinians by the Jewish state, him being a Jew, I think it's not hard to understand how he decided to dedicate his life to the Israel-Palestine conflict and why he takes such like a brutal approach. Like I think I understand where it comes from. I don't think his intention is nefarious. I think he genuinely does want to see a solution. I have many questions about the effectiveness of his approach. A few more super chats. Superman, I'd love to see solutions actually land in some sort of mock peace negotiation. You should hold one of these with the map on screen. Yeah, I'm open to that. And Orhan, thank you for the 50 knock. He's been ruined by his parents and never recovered. He's a lunatic. Yeah, and his parents were ruined by the Holocaust. Yeah, so the chain, the cycle continues. How do we break that cycle of traumatized people being more extreme than they have to be? It's a good question. Also, I'm going to be very honest about this. I don't like using the term self-hating Jew. I'm not big on my charges of anti-Semitism. But from my research on Norm, and by the way, for those who think I'm rude calling him Norm, I asked him how I should address him. He told me to call him Norm, so that's what I'm doing. I think it's fair to say that he has resentment towards the Jewish people. I can confidently say that. I'd even be willing to ask him about it. I think the Jews have been his greatest ideological opponent nearly his entire life. I think his entire struggle, his whole life has been against the Jewish state, and I think it has built resentment towards Jews. Call this self-hate. I mean, I want to say hate is too strong a word, but I think that's a fair way to describe him. And you see it in how he talks about Jews and Israelis, and his really lack of compassion for any Jewish related struggle since the Holocaust. Again, some of his best friends are Jews. I'm not saying that. Again, this is not the case in making. He obviously he doesn't hate Jews. He doesn't explicitly refuse to speak to Jews. But I think he has internalized resentment towards the Jewish community. I think it's not hard to understand why he has that resentment. But I think if we're going to be honest, we could acknowledge that it exists. Aaron, you say Israelis, not Jews in general. No, I'm not sure. If you look at his lifelong battle against American Jews, they've really been his greatest ideological opponent. The way he dismisses anti-Semitism, he says the talk about anti-Semitism is a joke. This is another topic I wanted to discuss with him. I'm someone who doesn't consider anti-Semitism to be something that negatively affects me on a day-to-day. I do think that anti-Semitism, like racism and other social justice movements, I think these words are being weaponized to control dialogue. I think that Western society has incentivized victimhood. So I think him and I would agree there, but I very much think we can't be dismissive towards people who face hate, and he very much is. He also, the way he talks about Jewish lawyers, there's a lot there that would, if you really look into him, you'll see that it's not a radical claim saying that there's some resentment there. And again, it's, let's understand how humans become the way they are. Look at his life, look at his history. I can understand it. I'm just trying to be honest in my assessment. Oh, $10 super chat. Plutus for you. In my honest opinion, being ostracized by academia and parts of the Jewish community has made him take a more radical, controversial approach, perhaps to maintain a voice. He's genuine, but approach detracts from his message. I agree completely, Plutus, with this, 100%. I think he's genuine, but his approach really detracts from his message. So he's a two-stater. Nir asks, what's his solution? Norman Finkelstein is a two-stater. He's a very staunch two-stater. He doesn't support endless right of return. He does want some right of return, but he says that Palestinians can't expect Israel to absorb 7 million Palestinians. He says that's a call for Israel's destruction. So these are all very moderate stances he's taken on the conflict. I did want to talk to him about solutions because I want to see if he still thinks the two-state solution is viable. And I think, he say that Palestinians are ready for two states and Israelis aren't. I mean, I don't think that's grounded in reality. I wanted to push him on that. I think there's not, I hear the case that Israelis aren't. Israel, the nation, is not for two states, and around 50% of its population isn't for two states. But I don't think it's grounded in reality to say Palestinians want two states. I mean, most don't, and this is just the truth. I have many Palestinian friends. We have many Palestinians on the show. There's polling to back this up. The majority of Palestinians don't support a two-state solution, and those who generally do don't see it as the end result. They see it as just an improvement of their situation, and then the struggle to liberate all of Palestine will continue. And again, Palestinians are honest about this. I'm not assuming Palestinian intentions. Am I saying that no Palestinian wants two states? No, of course not. Many are very happy to live side by side with their Jewish brothers and sisters, but calls for liberation of the land from the river to the sea, or calls for accepting two states in order to continue the struggle afterwards. I mean, these aren't novel. We hear them. Let's see. Beast goes, Adar, these are serious things to say, and it isn't fair to say these things if he isn't here to defend himself. If you're going to call him a troll and say he hates Jews, then that should be said to him. I mean, I don't think I fully agree with that. We just couldn't get to all the topics. I think it's completely legitimate for me to try to give an analysis of a human being. They don't need to be in the room for me to give an analysis. Like you could say, you could accuse me of speaking bad behind somebody's back, but I'm not trashing Norman. I am trying to give an honest, good faith analysis of who I think he is as a person. As I mentioned, I like the guy. I respect him. But I think that some of what he does to be intentionally inflammatory. And I think he has resentment towards Jews. This is me giving an honest analysis. It's just completely false that somebody needs to be in front of you in order for you to try to give any analysis. What you could accuse me of is saying that I don't have the courage to say that to his face or to ask him about it to his face. But I was actually planning on getting to such topics. We just didn't have time. Thanks to Right Adar analysis. Thanks for supporting me, Leica. Matthew K, $5. Thank you so much. I think a convo with Norm should be framed as a debate and would highly benefit from a separate moderator. He's kind of a slow talker and long-winded. Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to bring him on to debate somebody else. I'd also be happy to do more of a debate format with him. I also let me also share with you all, because I think this is an important strategy. When discussing with somebody, we didn't touch on many topics, but I very much went into this knowing that there's certain things that I can't debate Norman on. History and international law, I'm not as equal in any way, shape, or form. That's why if you notice the things I spoke to him about are things that come down to approach and strategy, things that often touch on the human element, things that are not necessarily knowledge-based, but emotional intelligence-based. And these are areas where I feel very comfortable pushing back on him. So this is just, I have no problem revealing my strategy here, because I think it could be useful. If you're going to engage with somebody, a way to do so effectively is to have a conversation in an area where you're very comfortable. If I wanted to challenge him on history or international law, and perhaps I'd agree with most of what he says there, but I'm just not equipped to even make that challenge. And if I wanted to be equipped, I would need to read probably a few hundred books just to get close to his level. Like, he's written thousands of books on the conflict and in international law. So let's see what else we got. Who would you guys want to see debate Norman? So Base goes, then I hope you cover these things in your next meeting, because it's only fair. So yeah, I'll invite him back on. Let's see how many topics we get to. But Beast, again, I'm not making some like vile charge against him. I'm trying to analyze him in a very honest and compassionate way. So, you know, Rudy or Ishai. No, look, I'm not. So let's talk about suggestions. There are certain names we could put Norman with that will do well in terms of views, but it needs to be another academic. It can't just be an activist. Activists should be debating activists. Academics should be debating activists. I learned this from the Rudy Chomsky debate, just because they very much were talking past each other for most of it. That's how I felt, and it seems like they were just speaking different languages. So I don't want to put, if we bring on Norman for like an official debate, we talk about, let's think of people who like academics in the field. Or I guess we can do it a debate about approach, which then you could have anybody who has just a different approach in activism. I guess I'm open to it, but let's try to think of academics. Joe Webb asked, there's no way Alan would debate Norm again. I guess someone recommended that. Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. That'd be amazing if we could set up round two. But yeah, I'm not sure they would do that. We hear Netanyahu versus Norm. Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. So people are saying Chomsky. I just don't know what they would argue over. I learned yesterday that Chomsky played an influential role in Norman's life. I'm not sure what they would fight over. Super chat. Thanks, George. €5. You might consider looking into Majid Nawaz, not for Norman, but he's an interesting past, was Egyptian prisoner of terrorism and take on Israel. Yeah, I'm familiar with Majid. I'd be happy to talk to him. A lot of it is just like convincing them to come on the show. We're still fairly small, so we don't get many big names. It's interesting. People like those who are considered the most radical are the most likely to respond to emails, I've noticed. And again, depending on where you're situated on the ideological spectrum, you might not find these people to be radical, but how they're perceived in mainstream. Noam Chomsky responds to every email I send. Norman Finkelstein also pretty responsive. Ilan Pape responded to my emails. It's like a lot of the more moderate people you don't hear from them. It's interesting. I don't know what that's about. Yeah, so I'm hearing Einat Wilf. We've been in touch with Einat. We're looking for a good debate partner for her. Her and Norman, that could be interesting. In general, friends, we're always looking for like interesting matchups. So please message me if you have an interesting matchup or even an interesting guest. It could be a one-on-one interview. Gabor Mate, I'm seeing. So yeah, but him and Gabor will also probably agree on most things. Is Zionism inherently anti-Palestinian? How about tackling that question? Is that a question for me right now, or is that a debate topic you'd like to see? Gabor Mate, yes, yeah, you're right. I keep saying I'm going to reach out to him. I haven't yet, so I will. Cool. I'm going to start wrapping up. If there's any last questions, let me know, or should be in one of these debates. Or if you want to be on one of these debates, for sure. I'd love to have you on. Oh, me versus Or. We're seeing a matchup. Off Kilter wants to debate Or. I'm down to do that. We could even set it up for next week if you guys want to. Wise Shepherd goes, extremists respond because their career is built on this. I hear that. I need to think about that a little bit more. Off kilter, you're saying this is what Adar does. What do I do? Am I missing something? Starhopper, you want to debate sometime? People have requested your name quite a bit. You could stay anonymous. Elias would like to see Chen again. Chen against who? I'm open to doing that. I didn't find that debate to be super insightful. Like they were getting into some ad hominems and whataboutism. But yeah, if Chen's down, we could definitely do it. Love and Mercy goes, Or is a pretty smart dude. I agree. He's definitely a smart dude, very knowledgeable. Tenant Gigi goes, Adar only allows one kind of pro-Israeli opinion on his channel, those that use decolonization as an argument. He will not entertain property arguments, just laugh at them. I'm trying to read what you're saying in an open mind. So who's an example of using decolonization as an argument? I think we've had a pretty diverse group of pro-Israel people. I mean, Rudy Roshman, Yishai Fleischer, Yinon Kehati, Mordechai Kedar, Rafi Gassel. I guess he's right, would be right of center. I mean, this is a pretty diverse group of people that I guess a lot of these guys are one-staters. I'd say that what we haven't had enough of are right-wingers who support two-state solution. Yeah, we haven't had enough of those. But I'm interested in hearing what you mean by property. Just elaborate on your comment. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. Peter, so you're saying I'm sick of hearing debates about whether or not anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I want to hear a debate about whether or not Zionism is anti-Palestinian. Yeah, I'd be happy to set that up. I hear that there's a strong case to be made that there's something inherently anti-Palestinian in Zionism. I've heard counter arguments. I would definitely have that. I see Nir saying Nir goes Norm versus the guy who interviewed Olmert, Sherry Sufi. Yeah, that'd be an interesting one. Is he saying look into Bassam Aid? He's a Palestinian who will do a better job of countering Norman than any Israeli can. I'm familiar with Bassam. I'd be happy to have him on. Mordechai goes, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, nothing to debate. I disagree. I think it's definitely a debatable topic. That's definitely not as black and white as people try to present it to be. I'd say if you want to say a statement that's not debatable is that anti-Zionism is often perpetrated by anti-Semites. So anti-Semitism fuels anti-Zionism, not debatable. To say that anti-Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic, I think is up for debate. Malcolm versus Rudy, make it happen, Adar. I'm sick of hearing that guy. Oh, you're not happy with you're not happy with Malcolm, or you're not happy with Rudy? We could try. I don't know if they're on best terms. I'd need to look into that. I want to have Rudy on the show soon for a one-on-one just to catch up with him. Talk to him about his experience in Nigeria. I need to see if he's open to that, but. Cool. Anything else? Yeah, okay. Look, please send me recommendations. I'm happy to see if Norm wants to do a debate. We saw that he is interested to come back on for a one-on-one. I wanna. He only gives an hour at a time, and some of his explanations are like a good 10 minutes. So I need to think what the best way to do that and how I can conduct a conversation with him and be able to cover more ground. And I don't feel comfortable like cutting in and saying, please wrap it up. It's just, it's not my style. I did that a little bit today, but again, I don't want to like be very stern and say, okay, time's up. Unless we find a way to do it with like timer, like we have a countdown and it's like 3-minute response. That'd be interesting. Obama versus Trump, make it happen. We'll see about that, Matthew. I'll reach out to them. Anyways, do you all want to do an after party on Discord? Who wants to do an after party on Discord? Orhan goes, thank you, Adar, for this awesome channel. Shalom from Norway. Thanks for the 50 knock, Orhan. I really appreciate it. Here, whoever wants to do, whoops, that is the wrong thing I just posted. Hold on one second. Jake is saying I should debate Abby Martin. Honestly, I'd be happy to do that. If she'd be willing to come speak, for sure. For sure. So a little bit about what we have coming up. Did I push the right link? I did, yeah. So, oh, Vitor, $27.9 from Vitor Salvador Barzilai. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the super chat. Next Thursday, we're going to have Ellie Cohen and Sarah. What's your last name? Hold on. Sarah Simon. These are two young ladies who are very involved in educating people about anti-Semitism. I'm growing concerned with how Jewish discourse on anti-Semitism is taking place. I think we are not doing a good job. I think we're taking a lot of pages out of the book of woke social justice, and I think this is not the way Jews should approach their activism. So I want to start talking to people who are on the front lines fighting activism, fighting anti-Semitism, and see how we can get back on track, because I think we're headed in the wrong direction by and large. Hassan goes, also, thank you, Adar. This is what we need for peace, open dialogue instead of whitewashing the conflict as commonly practiced by Israeli activists. Thank you, Hassan. I appreciate those words. I agree. Open dialogue is what we need. And the critique that Israeli activists are very reserved when it comes to criticizing Israel, I would say is true. And I would say that those activists would have much more legitimacy if they would be more open with their critique of Israel. Generally speaking, we see all this like visceral hate towards Israel. We really see Israel hated at a whole different level. Like, let's compare Israel to China, right? And again, I don't want to compare suffering. I think suffering is horrible and we should work to end it wherever we see it. But let's just be under the assumption that the suffering that the Uyghurs are going through in China is comparable to the suffering the Palestinians are going through. Very different, very different situations, but let's just say that they're both suffering. You don't see even a fraction of the hate that Israel gets towards China, right? So many activists see this and they say the whole world is against us. I want to support Israel, so I'm not going to contribute to the condemnation of Israel. Why would I do that? There's already so much of it. So this, I think, is the logic to many activists and why they refuse to criticize Israel. The problem with that is two things. One, when you refuse to criticize Israel and all you do is defend Israel, nobody's going to listen to you. The only people listening are those who already agree. You gain legitimacy in your defense of Israel by honestly criticizing Israel. That's number one. Number two, if the only people who are going to criticize Israel are those who wish to destroy Israel, then the narrative is actually controlled and dominated by those who wish to see Israel's destruction rather than those who wish to see Israel improve as a country. So activists who love Israel or support Israel, or at the very least don't want to see Israel destroyed, should be vocal in their critique of Israel. We shouldn't shy away from it. Cool. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you all so much for joining. Have a great weekend, everybody. Next Thursday, we have that discussion on anti-Semitism. Maybe I'll do a live stream midweek, maybe sharing more reflections on the discussion with Norman, maybe something else. We'll see. As always, thank you so much for joining, and I'm always happy to get feedback, criticism, and suggestions for how we can improve. So, every time we get a super chat, it's like it motivates me to stay on a little bit longer. So fine, Matthew, fine. 3 more minutes because of this $5. Invite some owners of opposing activist social media accounts like Eyes on Palestine, Bassam Aid, etc. Discuss how to be more productive on social media. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Listen, if anybody's watching this wants to help us, we have a team of volunteers, but we could always use more. One of the areas we need the most help is reaching out to people and booking guests. If anybody wants to help us with booking and matchmaking, please let me know. Reach out to me. You can find my contact information in the description. We also need help with social media. We want to make some more infographics for Twitter. So there's just a lot of stuff we want to do. It all comes down to the amount of human effort we have. So let me know. You see that human effort is the gender neutral version of manpower. It's a good one, human effort. Adar's time is worth $5 for every 3 minutes confirmed. Ari, yeah, I'd say that's the price. Leica says, say manpower. No, I like human effort. Look, let's talk about this, okay? So I'm very critical of what's become known as wokeness for many reasons. I mean, I very much appreciate individualism, and I use like a humanist framework to view the world. Wokeness is the antithesis to that in so many ways, and that's why I'm so critical. But there are certain aspects of social justice that I agree with. I'm not anti-social justice. I just think their approach to it is wrong. But when it comes to modifying language in a way to be more inclusive, I actually think that's beneficial because the language we use impacts the way we view the world. Okay, our reality very much is not dependent but connected to the words we have to describe reality. So if we use the term man to describe everything, manpower, snowman, mailman, whatever, man is everywhere, subconsciously it does give the impression that it's a man-dominated world, man-dominated industries. If we can change those for things like human effort, I actually think society would be better off. This isn't a woke stance. This is a completely rational and sensible approach to creating a better world, reforming our language. Now, where I differ from wokeness is I'm not going to yell at somebody for using manpower. I'm not going to get upset. I'm not going to try to cancel. No, use the language you want. Educate with love, not with anger. So, this is where I very much differ from woke social justice, but I think that is a good ideal that we could evolve language, to just improve society. Someone's asking what's my email, adarweinreb@gmail.com. But I'm more responsive on like Discord and stuff like that, and Facebook and Instagram. Hey, I'm a millennial, you know. Emails are the older generation. Of course, you would say that as a white man. Oh, and then / sarcasm. Okay. I would have accepted it even if it wasn't sarcastic. So Peter M. Goes woke, and then explaining woke is complete equality of social and political rights to all inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscious language, education, and culture. Peter, I'm going to say that this is slightly disingenuous, and I'll tell you why. You can define wokeness as that. That's your right. And it's true that woke is a problematic word because people define it differently. So I'm not going to say that you can't use that definition of wokeness. But when people who oppose wokeness are what they're describing, what they're concerned by is not what you just described. It's almost like a form of gaslighting to even frame it that way, to make it seem like when I have a concern with wokeness that I'm just against complete equality of social and political rights. Absolutely not. I'm very much opposed to a set of beliefs that I think A, harms the people who believe it, and B, inflames the people who are in opposition to it. It separates society. It breeds victim mentality. It creates resentment. It strips people of their individuality. It tells you that somebody's race, sex, or race, gender, or sexual orientation is the most important thing about them, not their individuality. It conveniently leaves out socioeconomic class. Why? Because there's a lot of poor white people, and that's just not convenient for the narrative. This is what people are talking about when they say wokeness. So you could have a different definition, but it's disingenuous to make it seem like this is what people are concerned about, because it's not at all. And then Peter goes, I was quoting from the Israeli Declaration of Independence. I thought you'd recognize the words. So first of all, Peter, good troll job. No, I did not notice that. But you did something that I see all the time, right? So somebody can be like, I have a problem with Antifa, right? I don't like Antifa because I don't think that people should just be taking the law into their own hands and acting violent towards whoever they describe to be a fascist. It's not just that they're anti-fascist, it's their definition of fascist is the entire right wing of America, right? So I could give a legitimate critique of Antifa, and then somebody will say, oh, so you're anti-Antifa, that means you're for fascism, right? It's a false dichotomy. It's a form of gaslighting, and I see it all the time. So I thought you were engaging in that, but no, guess not. Elias goes in, like always, and like I agree that Norman shouldn't generalize when it comes to Israelis. Yeah, that's something I just didn't have time to push back on, but yeah. Or goes, Israel is woke. I'm so happy that wokeness in Israel, like I would like the left in Israel to be a little bit bigger and more robust, but I'm very happy that wokeness is quite minimal here. I actually think it would not do good for Jews if and look, there's discrimination. There's like the country was built by Ashkenazi Jews. You could talk about Ashkenazi privilege. Like there's a lot of, it's Israel by no means is a perfect society, right? There's definitely need for social justice, but it would not be beneficial for Israeli society and even for the upward mobility of Mizrahim and Sephardim if every one of them or the majority of them felt like they were somehow the victim and that they can't succeed because of Ashkenazi supremacy, and that you need to deconstruct and reconstruct the country because Ashkenazi supremacy is ingrained so deeply into the system that reconstruction is the only way to do it, right? So that that's not going to be the good for Israeli society. It's not going to be good for people who adhere to those beliefs. Elias, you're telling me to look at another. Oh, sorry. Yep, here's your full comment, Elias. Adar, much respect to you, but just a suggestion that relates to academic approach. Can you please be more nuanced when speaking about Palestinians? Most want to liberate the whole land. Yeah, I hear you. I don't remember the exact language I used. If I said most Palestinians want to liberate the entire land, I look, I get what you're saying. I make an effort to not do those generalizations because I see them as harmful, but I actually think that this is an accurate statement. I think that the majority of Palestinians, their aspiration is a free Palestine from the river to the sea. If I'm wrong, then I will retract that statement, of course. But based off polling and based off my life experience, which is obviously anecdotal, I'm pretty confident in the claim that the majority do have that aspiration. Am I going to go far to say that the majority are genocidal? No, I don't think that the majority of Palestinians want to kill Jews. But yeah, I think if you speak to them, and we speak to many Palestinians, I think most of them want to liberate Palestine from the river to sea. And again, if it's not most, then I apologize. Peter goes, I would like to hear Adar show his anti-wokeness and say that in Israel, whether or not a person is Jewish should not be the most important thing about them. It obviously shouldn't. Being Jewish doesn't in any way, shape, or form determine your value as a human being. I mean, some of the worst people, like in history, were Jewish, and some of the most amazing people were Jewish. So no, I get what you're saying because it's a Jewish state. It's true. You need to be Jewish to be able to make Aliyah and get benefits. Yeah, it's a state that prefers Jews for sure. But in no way, shape, or form adhere to the framework that somehow Judaism, impacts your value as a human. No, not even close. It's an unrealistic dream, though, Adar. What is? You got to leave context because I don't always know what your comment is referring to. Anyways, okay, that's it. We're gonna wrap it up. After party in Discord. I don't think I'm gonna join. I've had a long day. I want to relax. Maybe for a few minutes I'll hop in. And yeah, see you sometime next week. Have a beautiful weekend, everybody.